Picture this team: Patrick Mahomes, CeeDee Lamb, Christian McCaffrey, Myles Garrett, and Sauce Gardner. Well, you know why this isn't possible? The salary cap. The reason rich teams can't simply pay a lot of money and build a super team is because of this rule. It was introduced in 1994 and it changed the league forever. So what is the salary cap and how did it change the way teams were built in the NFL? The salary cap sets a limit on how much money each team can spend on their players' salaries every year. It is calculated by taking the league's projected revenue from television, sponsorships, ticket sales, and anything related to the business of football, dividing it by 32, i.e. the number of teams, and then taking 48% of that number. For example, in 2024, the salary cap will be just over 255 million. This means every team can't spend more than that amount on their players. If a team spends more than the salary cap, they face penalties that could include paying fines or losing draft picks. When the salary cap was first introduced, it was just over $34 million. Fast forward to today, and it's 255 million. Of course, some years it's been more, but that's about 6.5% yearly increase. Take the Dallas Cowboys as an example. With a $255 million salary cap, they decide to pay $50 million to Dak Prescott, $25 million to CeeDee Lamb, $30 million to Micah Parsons, and then they have $150 million to pay the rest of the team. So how did the NFL work before the salary cap? Well, to ensure the league remained profitable, they had to keep control of player salaries, so they didn't exceed the revenue generated by the league. The way they did this was heavily restricting a player's movement between teams. Free agency wasn't actually introduced till 1993, a year prior to the cap. When a player's contract ended, they became a free agent, and if another team wanted to sign them, they had to give the player's old team something in return. That could be players' future draft picks or money. Because this was often a big price to pay, teams were very hesitant to sign free agents from other teams. As players couldn't seek the highest bidder as a free agent, the NFL controlled bidding wars, but players argued this suppressed salaries. So in 1994, they introduced a salary cap, and it's been growing ever since. So a couple examples of teams that couldn't keep a key player on the team because they couldn't afford them. One example is Ricky Watters, who was a star running back for the 49ers in the 90s. In the 1994 season, he rushed for 877 yards and 6 touchdowns. Following the 1994 season, after they won the Super Bowl, Watters became a free agent, and the 49ers couldn't afford to re-sign him, versus the offer he received from the Eagles. He'd continue a successful career after leaving San Francisco, rushing for over 1,000 yards every year up until the final season of his career in 2001. A recent example of a team not being able to pay a star was the Chiefs. They had just paid defensive tackle Chris Jones, as well as some other players that needed to be re-signed, so they didn't have enough money to pay star cornerback L'Jarius Sneed, and ultimately he was traded to the Titans for a draft pick. In the 2023 season, Sneed was a crucial part of the Chiefs defense. He covered the opponent's top receiver at least 65% of the snaps, a league high 7 times, during the regular season. He didn't allow a touchdown catch as the nearest defender in coverage all season until the Chiefs' divisional round playoff win over the Buffalo Bills. Now, it's not like these losses ruined the franchise, but it seems to bring more parity. But is that actually the case? A paper published in 2004 explored the impact of the salary cap on the NFL's competitive balance using the Gini index. And the index works as follows. Imagine there are 10 teams and you want to see how evenly the wins are spread out. If each team wins an equal number of games, that's perfectly fair. But if one team wins almost all the games and the others win very few, that's unfair. So the paper uses this index to measure the fairness of the league. An index of 0 means all teams win the same number of games, while an index of 1 means one team wins all the games and others win none. The paper concludes the data from 1973 through 2003 show neither an improvement in competitive balance over time nor a discernible change in competitive balance after the NFL instituted a salary cap before the start of the 1994 season. And this is because teams can avoid salary cap restrictions by creating team-friendly contracts, for example, deferring payments. They also cite the fact that a team's difficulty schedule is determined by their record the previous season, i.e. a bad team has an easier schedule, which reduces the variation in the distribution of team wins. Now, this data does only analyze 10 years of free agency. It was published in 2004, and free agency came into effect 1994, so I'm not sure how this data would look now, but it's clear the salary cap alone does not level the playing field. There are other factors at play, be that free agency, ownership, and drafting. A paper titled Team Success and Personnel Allocation under the NFL Salary Cap analyzed how NFL teams spend their money on players when there's a limit. It tries to figure out the best way to spend the money to win more games, and I think the conclusion of this paper explains the finding from the previous paper we just discussed, and how the salary cap has had an effect. The key findings were smart spending over big spending, so it's not actually about how much money a team has, but how wisely they spend it. Good team managers can make a winning team even with the same amount of money as others. And then important positions. Spending money on certain players like kickers, quarterbacks can help the team win more games than spending on other positions. Put simply, the paper shows that NFL teams need to be smart with their money. They can't just buy the best players, they have to choose wisely to build a winning team within the spending limits. We can also take a quick look at other professional sports leagues that don't have a salary cap and check for parity in those leagues. Despite being English, I have no interest in soccer or football, whatever, so I'm not going to sit here and have a strong opinion on if a salary cap would work there. That being said, if you look at who has won the Premier League, which is the top league in the UK, to me it doesn't seem like there's much parity. Only a handful of teams have won over the last 20 years, and they also happen to be the richest teams. That being said, I'm not saying a salary cap would work. As we just saw in the NFL, it's not just the money that determines winning. And what about America's pastime? While the MLB doesn't have a salary cap, there is a luxury tax known as the competitive balance tax. This regulates the total sum of money a given team can spend on their roster. Again, I know nothing about baseball, but if we're to go just off who wins the World Series, there seems to be way more parity than soccer. So some type of spending restriction does seem to have an impact. Alright, thanks for watching.